Thank you so much, Chris. It's great to be here at our Vin Diesel Appreciation Club meetup. Who am I? I am Ray Wolfram. I am a senior product manager at Microsoft. I help build out our managed security services. I am a lifelong New Yorker. As Chris shared, I did brave the earthquake 2024 yesterday, and apparently a fire today at the hotel. Many portents of doom to get here, but I am very excited to chat with you today about phishing and drawing parallels between Fast and the Furious. And why is that? Why is there a connection? Well, like Dom Toretto and his crew, I mean, they live and die by trust. Right? So they need to adapt quickly to think fast and act fast to overcome their adversaries, which is very similar to what we do as cybersecurity practitioners. We need to evolve quickly, we need to strategize, and we need to address threats in a way that makes sense, and they're more holistic in nature because we are existing in a very interconnected world, and our digital community is constantly evolving, and we need to stay ahead of the bad actors that focus on targeting us. So, in terms of the basics here, when we think of phishing, right, we're impersonating a trusted source to collect or acquire content and information from us. We need to focus on a couple of items, right? So we look at the 3 pillars of email security or authentication. So the first layer, the bedrock, is going to be SPF, which is the Sender Policy Framework. And that's essentially a list of trusted servers that can send email on our behalf. We next look at DKIM, which is domain keys identified mail. And that's essentially ensuring that the content of the email has not been tampered with and it's maintaining the integrity. And the last dimension of this trifecta is DMARC. And that is essentially domain-based message authentication reporting and conformance, and it ties everything together, and it's essentially a policy that handles emails or messages that have failed the SPF check as well as DKIM, and then reports back out to the organization with the information in terms of the sender and the contents, etc. And this is really important just to understand the framework and the world that we're operating in, right? So when we think of phishing, we need to figure out who's actually sending the campaign, the nefarious or sinister email, and then identify, what we can do, the controls that we can implement, set in place to thwart that or prevent it. So this is a phishing saga in 4 parts, right? So we're going to start with the acquisition or obtaining the domain credentials of the domain that we're going to spoof or attack. And the second element of this is to set up a campaign builder. We essentially used MailChimp for research purposes. You can use another platform, but MailChimp is particularly interesting because they put a bee in my bonnet, and they're not necessarily as engaged or they don't follow good practices of cyber citizenship. And then we're going to execute or send that campaign blast, and then we can wreak havoc at scale. And so when we think of this phishing campaign, it could be exploited in a myriad of ways. It could be identity theft, financial fraud, malware distribution, just eroding brand reputation, etc. So there are 4 key components of this phishing attack, and they could be manipulated in various ways, but all to say that they stem from the email campaign builder as really the force amplifier of this attack. And so historically, as of November 2023, we were able to leverage or harness the MailChimp system and platform to basically spoof any email on that domain, whether it existed or not. So we can sign up with, I signed up with my university email information, and I was able to execute or deploy or send spoof messages as admin at the domain, and it looked legitimate. And there were no controls in place except for having to verify the initial email account. So the account that I signed up with, which was the domain address. And then once that was verified, it was off to the races. We can send it as admin at domain. We could send it at bursar at domain, another person specifically at domain. Really, there were no limits here. Now we jump ahead to 2024. I'm finalizing my research and putting the finishing touches on the presentation for B-Sides. And holy cannoli, the exploit that I was going to report on is not functioning as expected. It actually cracked down, and they shored up their gaps, in MailChimp in particular. Even though we had a particular email address that was verified, we would have to send as that verified email address. We were not able to send as any other email address on that domain. And that was because of this push, this new requirement that Google and Yahoo have been spearheading. So as of February 2024, organizations need to implement or roll out DMARC, which is that domain-based messaging, authentication, reporting, and conformance. So that means it brings together the SPF record, which is the list that specifies the trusted senders on behalf of an organization. It takes DKIM, which is domain keys identified mail, which is now validating or verifying that that email content has not been tampered with, brings them together and checks to see if they are in alignment. And if they're not in alignment, it provides action to take, or a policy that says, well, if they fail these tests, then either reject them altogether, send them to spam, etc. And because of this push, because of this requirement that Google and Yahoo have led across the global community, MailChimp has restricted their sending to only verified email accounts for HTML campaigns. However, they have not restricted it for plain text email campaigns. So for a plain text email campaign, even if you have one verified email address, you can still send messages from any other email account in that domain. Again, whether it exists or not, whether it's fictitious or not. So even though we have a plain text message, or it doesn't have any styling, it doesn't have any images, you can still be very effective and cause a lot of damage. There are many reasons why organizations still use plain text. We have calls to action, we have emergency services, major updates, newsworthy updates that don't necessarily warrant glossy marketing or anything of that nature. So essentially, it's just text, and you can add URLs or links. So for this exploit here, we made it an emergency services email message, plain text, and then we dropped in a short link. And that short link routed to, Never Gonna Give You Up, Rick Rolling YouTube video. And we have here how it appears on desktop, right? So what's super interesting about this is we have the university help desk, so it's help desk at the university.edu domain. We see that it also appends MailChimp at the end of it. So that's a bit of a red flag, that's a signal. But what's fantastic, it gets even better, is that for that short link, MailChimp has converted it, has essentially masked that link to now include the university domain. And it appears that it's actually a legitimate email from a legitimate sender within that domain with a legitimate purpose. Click here, take that action that we're pushing you towards. So essentially, MailChimp does much of the work for you on masking all of that URL information. And then when we look at the mobile version of this, we don't see any MailChimp appended to the from sender. We still see that masked URL, which is fantastic. And if I were to just get this on my mobile device and it seems so realistic, I might even be swayed to just click it here because it really is playing on that urgency and the legitimacy of the sender. And so when we take a step back, we want to participate in responsible disclosure, so we report it, and it was kicked back as out of scope, and it was closed by the responsible disclosure team. We then reached out to the email campaign builder service, and they shared that, we did bolster our security controls for the HTML campaign, and we have not taken any action on plain text, but that's not really our problem. It's a problem, but it's really on behalf of the organizations themselves to address. And then we reached out to the university to let them know of this issue. And they're actually taking strides to improve their security posture. But it really invites us to ask this question, is there any onus on the service provider to enhance or bolster security controls on behalf of the digital community at large, especially when we see the efficacy of the DMARC push by Google and Yahoo. And if we think about what MailChimp shared with us and their response, and we don't hold the immediate support team responsible for it, but it's basically, they told us to go control F ourselves. Like it's a problem, but it's not our problem. It's a you thing, figure it out. And that's really tough when you're a small team and your budget is tight, or you don't have stakeholder buy-in, and you're pulled in many directions, or you have legacy applications that you need to address and consider in the broader ecosystem of the tools you're responsible for. It may not be just a simple, we will figure it out somehow, but we can go back to the fundamentals, right? So there is the option of the service provider doing the right thing and enhancing their security controls. We saw it in one module of their service platform, and they could obviously extend that to the other area where it's plain text emails, right? Because they have it for HTML emails. Alternatively, or in conjunction, we can empower the organization to at least roll out at bare minimum, SPF record checks. We can have DKIM in place, and then DMARC to bring it together. There are other solutions that they could deploy that would do it on their behalf, and it's obviously a lift to roll out. But these are kind of the fundamentals or the basics of a security program, and when we think of email controls, this is the bread and butter. So this is important to have, and it's also important to know this is a real life scenario. There is a university that does not have any of this in place, and this is not something that is seldom seen. This is prevalent across the community. And again, when you think of resourcing, when you think of burnout, this is something where we as a community can come together. So not just the organizations having that responsibility to address their own security program, but we can also look at essentially the world at large to do their part and participate in good cyber citizenship. And obviously, we always want to be empowering our end users, obviously internally with our programs, but again, at a global scale, and just think more critically around the emails that they are getting and the implications of their actions and the cascading effects. So these are really, I think, thorny problems, but they are persistent. And we can come together as a global group and think creatively around how to address them and how to have more meaningful impact across the board. So this is essentially the presentation. This is the call to action, to think creatively, to know that just because it's a service and it's widely, it's visible, it's high profile, it can be exploited, and it could be a vector of attack in your organization, and it could cause adverse impact if it gets in the hands of a threat actor. And there are obviously steps that we can take to make sure that we, again, as a global community, have our end user empowerment, awareness and trainings, and also tools and controls that we can potentially roll out as requirements across the board that can minimize the threat of these attack vectors. So thank you for coming to the presentation. I hope it added value to your understanding.
We have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah.
Do you think that a banner would really help the users?
Yeah, that's excellent. So I would say yes. If they were to receive an email with an external sender banner, that would at least provide a moment of pause and say, this is coming allegedly or ostensibly coming from the university help desk. Why is there also a banner associated with it that's saying this is outside of our domain, right? I think even those small cues could have a big impact in benefiting, addressing those vulnerabilities from actually occurring. Yeah.
Do you see much in the way of business culture trying to help address the problem with phishing emails? So in my organization, we created a Teams channel, and it almost became a game to say, hey, if you see a fish, if you see something that looks like a fish, drop it in this Teams channel. And then so we start everybody seeing what everybody is getting. And now it becomes like a game where people are so much more hyper acute because they want to be a part of the game of putting in the fish into a Teams channel. Are you seeing any of that?
Gamification is huge, and I think that there's such opportunity there. It's typically, if it's done at the organizational level, I think that's super impressive. Usually, from what I've seen so far, it's more vendor-led, and that makes sense. They have the resources and the cycles to dedicate, but folks love to win, right? They love a challenge, and I think if the organizations can find space within their program responsibilities, that would be a great way to drive it forward and promote end user awareness and training in a fun way that'll stick. Yeah.
This seems like a great way for a nefarious actor to get someone to click and give them something, some type of information, phishing-wise. Do you think that there's examples of this being used not for nefarious reasons, but someone added it and they're the marketing team, so they have something that's called some type of special events that they've created these fake domain names or fake addresses for? Is there a proper use of this where MailChimp in this case might think that they've empowered the folks, or is it obviously we all see the dangerous side?
Yes.
But is this if you shut it off today, is there a possibility it would break things for folks that are taking advantage of this for positive reasons today?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I would say that there are situations where it would make business sense to have somebody crafting an email on behalf of the organization at large, and you maybe want to associate a group mailbox with it, not necessarily the individual themselves is personally creating that message, and you want to drive large campaigns and promote end user engagement. That would still be able to be feasible in the world where an email marketing campaign builder provider forced email verification. You can still absolutely support the development and the deployment of these email blasts with that email verification step. It's not creating barriers to using either the platform or to sending out the campaign overall. And that's why I really put a bee in my bonnet, to be honest, when the response was like, yeah, we did it for HTML because Yahoo and Google are making us, but for plain text, we didn't, and that's up to the organization. Like, obviously, there's acknowledgement that this is a risk, and it ties into, again, the 3 pillars of email authentication, or SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. And now it's just great to see parity across the different types of messaging campaigns, which is, you know, HTML as well as plain text. So thank you for the question. Yeah?
Do you know if other mail senders are doing like the same thing, like iContact or the other big ones?
I personally tried other campaign builders, and they required email verification across the board, which I found really interesting. The ones I tried, they required the email verification. So, but there's still more to be done in this realm. So I think that is a good question. Thank you. Is there anyone else?
That was pretty much
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
use other platforms in a similar way, or this is just one example?
I'd imagine you know, again, I have not tested the entire universe, but it's still worth, you know, kicking the tires on, again, because there are gaps here, right? Because as of December of 2023, you could exploit HTML campaigns. And quite honestly, you can still exploit the HTML campaign for the historical account that was created, the admin at domain.edu. You just can't make new one-off email addresses. But as of right now, that one has been patched essentially, and now you can really only exploit plain text. But for other ones, I think Campaign Monitor is coming top of mind. You need to verify the email sender. Yeah?
Funny story.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So my organization did a phishing exercise, sent out to about 1,000 users, and like you said, the IRS type thing, right? Tax season,
Yeah?
and somebody sent that email to the IRS. Yeah, and so the IRS is like, did their investigation, figured out it was our organization doing it, sent us a cease and desist letter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like, so actual legal implications from this kind of, okay. Yeah, it's no joke, right? Like, so it's just an email. What's the problem, right? Or like, oh, it's very unlikely that somebody is going to click on an email and cause damage. That's not the case. There are literally institutions and organizations that are like legitimate and not 5-10 person shops, like their entire universities that simply just don't have the basics implemented. And I come from a world, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, if you see something, you say something. And they're very basic efforts that we can take and apply that'll shore up those vulnerabilities and mitigate the risk. And it's not a ding on the organization, right? It takes a community, it takes a village, and that's what we see here, where, you know, Google and Yahoo said, listen, this is, like, we are doing this, we are enforcing this is a requirement. Organizations need to have DMARC in place in order to leverage these services, because it's not just the organization that's going to get hit, there's going to be cascading effects globally, and there's that interconnectedness piece that we need to think critically about. So I see that this is really the advent of something very powerful. And thank you for sharing your example, because it's like, it's just an email, but it's really not. Like, you can have very real world impacts and fallout from that. Yeah?
I don't know if you know the answer, or maybe someone in the room does. Can you, as an organization, block things from like a MailChimp or a campaign client from coming into your organization? Is that something you could set up at like
Anti-spam, you know, filtering solutions, yeah. So again, there are tools designed for this to address it. There are just fundamental things you can do, but it requires time, it requires money. Not every organization has that. And so that is a very important question to ask, and that's why we have, you know, these pushes to require things like DMARC. So like, well, if you have enough budget and time to leverage a MailChimp, then you have enough budget and time to implement your DMARC record and make sure that your program makes sense. So I think that is a great thing to see, and it's a step in the right direction, and hopefully we can have vendors follow suit in a more meaningful way. So not necessarily follow just the letter of the law, but the spirit and intention of that law, or law in quotes. And then, support organizations implementing those controls as much as we can. And so it does take a global village to make it happen.
It seems like there needs to be a lot of outreach for like a lot of charity organizations. I know I get on like their MailChimp campaigns or whatnot, and I'm sure they have no idea what DMARC is or SPF sunscreen or something else.
Yeah, yes, yeah, for sure. There are different levels of complexity. Yeah, SPF would be the easiest. Yep, I love that. But when we think of DKIM and DMARC, there'd be a little bit more complexity there. It'll take more time. It's more of a lift. But yes, to your point, like those organizations are most vulnerable to the exploitation of this. So again, to see the requirement of DMARC makes sense, and potentially there will be service disruption. Because how do you connect and execute those outreach programs and solicit engagement and donations, et cetera, without that kind of a platform, without that kind of automation? But again, maybe it'll force vendors to say, it's not just the HTML campaign that needs to be shored up or improved or more secure. Maybe we need to roll this out more holistically and apply it across the board. Yes, yeah.
Do you see a lot of I've never read actually, do you see a lot of same tenant or same service attacks too, such as targeting organizations that both use MailChimp from MailChimp, but they forward legitimate domain too?
Yeah, so we have like insider threats. It does, you can absolutely, as long as one account is compromised, and it could just be a bad actor within the organization. It's like, hey, I am no longer part of the organization. They informed me today. Now I'm going to take my revenge, and they can do it in that way. So this is not just, as long as one account is compromised in an environment that is riddled with vulnerabilities at the most fundamental level, services like MailChimp present a very real risk. Yeah.
Could I like sign up for MailChimp with a personal email address and then validate a business email address, so even if I was no longer employed by that company, I would still have access to that MailChimp?
That's a really interesting use case. I haven't personally tried it, but it'd be a great evolution, of the research. Yeah.
I was wondering the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things you can do is a lot of companies, when they don't kill your account. They send all of your mail to the next person that's going to be dealing with your stuff. If you have access, either forward as a copy to your account or add it as an alias that'll then be forwarded. Most IT guys don't bother with any of that. They just send everything to the next person. So validation emails that get sent out will also get copied into you. And most of them from like MailChimp and the rest will sit there and say, if you didn't do this, don't worry.
Right.
Yeah.
So everybody ignores it.
Yeah.
But you actually have in your personal email or your throwaway account, you now have that validation, so you don't have to deal with it any longer. Easy way for any company you work for, or attempt at, or volunteered at. There's lots of ways to get access to a particular company's one-off email, just so that you can use it.
Yeah.
Not saying I've done it, I've seen it.
No, it's. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it just highlights that I think a lot of the news around breaches or attacks is like the responsibility or onus or burden is put on the organization. And that's understandable, but I think especially if a service provider is also in the mix, and that was like accelerating the attack or amplifying the attack in some way, the responsibility also lies with them, right? And so here, when we think of like even just the wording of the service spray, we'll use MailChimp as an example. Don't worry about it, it's fine. Like if you didn't do this, you're good to go, ignore it. Like I think we need to be a little bit more vigilant, right? Like maybe you want to actually talk to the actual help desk, because even though in this scenario, we're saying the email came from help desk, this individual does not have access to the help desk information, right? Like they're not actually reading their emails. They're just saying that the campaign is coming from help desk, but that's not actually the case. So maybe you want to have out of band confirmation, those processes, in order to mitigate the damage here that something like this exploitation could cause. Yeah?
Favorite Fast and Furious movie?
Oh, I would say the first one. I don't know. I just like the origin story of it all, and then the return of Han. I forget which one, but like when Han was taken out, that was very tough for me. But when we learned that he was resurrected and he was actually fine, I was like, go Han. So forgive me, I don't know the numbers quite, off the top of my head, but that's my hot take there. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers.